For decades, it was the unshakable pillar of West Africa, a symbol of unity, supposedly backed by the West, and designed to forge a prosperous future. But that pillar is now dust. 3 nations have declared their independence, not from a colonial power, but from the very institution meant to unite them. This isn't just a political spat, it's a full-blown rebellion. It's a bold declaration that for them, the era of outside influence in West Africa is over. The first domino has fallen. What happens when the rest start to wobble? What we're witnessing is more than just a headline. It's the deafening crack in a 50-year-old institution, the Economic Community of West African States, better known as ECOWAS. Born from a Pan-African dream of unity and strength, it now finds itself fractured, watching as 3 of its own, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, turn their backs and walk away. Their departure, which became official in January 2025, wasn't a quiet exit. It was a thunderous proclamation of sovereignty, a definitive rejection of a system they now claim has become a tool for foreign powers. This is the story of that rejection. It's how a dream of regional integration became, in the eyes of millions, a nightmare of external manipulation. It's the story of 3 nations in the heart of the turbulent Sahel, who decided the price of membership in this club was just too high. These are nations staring down rampant terrorism, deep economic hardship, and a crisis of identity, who looked at their regional big brother, ECOWAS, and found it wanting. Worse, from their perspective, they saw a puppet, with strings being pulled from Paris and Washington. We'll chart the course of this unprecedented schism, exploring the promise ECOWAS once held, the failures that tanked its credibility, and the final dramatic break that has redrawn the map of Africa. This is a story of 3 nations, cast as the heroes of their own struggle for self-determination. Their challenge was a security crisis that threatened to swallow them whole. Their antagonist wasn't just the terror groups in the desert, but the very organization that was supposed to be their greatest ally. And their solution, as bold as it is perilous, is to forge a new path together under a new flag: the Alliance of Sahel States. This is the story of the end of an era, and the uncertain but defiant birth of a new one. To get the sheer scale of this collapse, you have to understand what was being built. Let's go back to 1975. The winds of independence had swept across Africa, but the shadows of colonialism still hung heavy. New nations were fragile, finding their feet, and looking for a way to secure their hard-won sovereignty. It was in this mix of hope and anxiety that ECOWAS was born. The Treaty of Lagos was a revolutionary idea for its time. 15 nations, a mix of English and French-speaking states, came together to create a common economic market. The vision was huge, inspired by Europe's economic community, but with a uniquely African soul. It was about more than just trade. It was about creating a shared identity. The main goals were simple but powerful: the free movement of people, goods, and capital. Imagine a West African citizen being able to travel, live, and work anywhere from Cape Verde to Nigeria without the hassle of a visa. It was Pan-Africanism made real. The ambitions were massive. They planned for a single currency, harmonized economic policies, and huge transnational projects to bind the region together. And for a while, it seemed to work. ECOWAS became a powerful voice on the world stage. It intervened to end brutal civil wars in Liberia and Sierra Leone, earning a reputation as a regional peacekeeper. It set up protocols on democracy and good governance, establishing a zero-tolerance policy for coups. By all accounts, it was West Africa's most influential club. But even in its prime, there were whispers of trouble. Critics started calling it a president's club, a place where leaders would gather, praise each other, and protect their own power, often completely disconnected from the struggles of their people. The rules on democracy, while sounding great on paper, seemed to be selectively enforced. A military coup would get a swift condemnation, but a president bending a constitution to cling to power for a third term. that often got a quiet pass. This hypocrisy didn't go unnoticed. It planted seeds of cynicism that would later explode into open rebellion. The economic promises also started to feel empty for many. While elites and connected businesses cashed in on regional trade, the average person in a landlocked country like Mali or Niger saw little improvement in their daily life. The dream of a single currency remained just that, a dream. Instead, many nations stayed tied to the CFA franc, a currency system left over from the colonial era and linked to the French treasury, which many saw as a symbol of ongoing economic bondage. The dream of ECOWAS was a powerful one, but a dream that gets put off, as the poet Langston Hughes warned, can fester like a sore. It can sag like a heavy load, or it can explode. For years, the dream sagged, weighed down by its own contradictions, and the growing feeling that it wasn't serving the very people it was meant for. The grand project was cracking long before the first coup in the Sahel. So what went wrong? How did an organization built on brotherhood become an entity its own members now call a threat? The answer lies in the unforgiving sands of the Sahel, where a new and terrifying crisis would put the ideals of ECOWAS to the ultimate test and find them tragically hollow. The Sahel, a vast, arid belt stretching across Africa, a transition zone between the Sahara and the savannas. For centuries, it was a hub of trade and culture. In the 21st century, it became ground zero for a global security crisis. This is where the story of ECOWAS' decline hits the accelerator. Starting in the early 2010s, a perfect storm of extremist insurgencies, linked to groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, began to brew. They exploited local conflicts, weak governments, and borders that were impossible to patrol, spreading like wildfire. The violence was horrifying. Villages were burned, schools shut down, and huge swaths of territory fell out of state control. For the people of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, life became a daily fight for survival. The basic promise of a state, to protect its citizens, was broken. This was the crisis that landed on ECOWAS's doorstep, the biggest threat to regional stability in decades. And the bloc's response was, by nearly all accounts, a catastrophic failure. When the situation demanded decisive, unified action, ECOWAS hesitated. When it needed strong, African-led solutions, it relied too heavily on international partners, especially the former colonial power, France. French troops, under missions like Barkhane, were on the front lines, but their presence was a double-edged sword. While they provided military muscle, they also fueled a powerful narrative of neo-colonial meddling, feeding the perception that African nations still couldn't handle their own security. The people in the Sahel watched as their soldiers fought and died, often poorly equipped and without enough support. They saw their governments, which they already viewed as corrupt, failing to protect them. And they looked to ECOWAS and saw an organization that seemed more interested in holding summits in fancy hotels than in stopping the slaughter in their backyards. A view took hold that ECOWAS was an elite, out-of-touch club with no real answers. This inaction created a power vacuum, and the military stepped in to fill it. In Mali in 2020 and 2021, in Burkina Faso in 2022, and finally in Niger in 2023. In each country, the army seized power, and in each case, they were met with huge crowds of supporters. People poured into the streets of Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey not to protest the coups, but to celebrate them, waving Russian flags alongside their own. A clear signal they wanted a new kind of partner. The juntas pitched themselves as patriots, the only ones with the guts to restore security and national pride where civilian governments and their Western backers had failed. Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso, Colonel Assimi Goïta in Mali, and General Abdourahmane Tiani in Niger became the faces of this defiant new mood. They spoke a language of sovereignty that hit home with a public tired of feeling like pawns in someone else's game. They promised to do what ECOWAS and the West couldn't: defeat the terrorists and take back their land. For ECOWAS, the coups were a direct spit in the face, a violation of its core principles. The bloc had a choice: engage with the new reality on the ground and tackle the root causes, or stand on ceremony and punish the rule breakers. It chose the latter. And in doing so, it went from being seen as a negligent older brother to a full-blown antagonist in the eyes of millions. This is where the conflict truly ignites. ECOWAS's reaction to the coups wasn't self-reflection or dialogue. It was rage and punishment. The bloc's response was immediate and harsh. After the final straw, the coup in Niger in July 2023, ECOWAS didn't just suspend the country. It unleashed a firestorm of sanctions, the likes of which had never been seen before. These weren't targeted sanctions against military leaders. They were sweeping, brutal measures designed to bring an entire nation to its knees. They closed the borders, choking off a landlocked country from critical supplies. They froze the state's assets in regional banks. They shut down financial transactions. They even threatened to cut off the electricity flowing from neighboring Nigeria. The juntas would later call these sanctions illegal, illegitimate, inhumane, and irresponsible. The impact on ordinary people was instant and devastating. The price of food and medicine shot through the roof. People who had already suffered through years of violence and poverty were now being pushed towards starvation, not by terrorists, but by their own regional bloc. The narrative that this was punishment for defying the old order, and not about restoring democracy, quickly took hold. Many felt the sanctions were being pushed by outside powers, especially France, which had seen its influence collapse under the new juntas. In this view, ECOWAS was acting as an enforcer for Western interests, a puppet master disciplining its disobedient states. Then came the ultimate threat: military intervention. ECOWAS activated its standby force and gave the Niger junta an ultimatum: put the deposed president back in power, or face an invasion. This was a stunning escalation. The idea of West African soldiers marching into another West African nation to force a political outcome was unthinkable to many. It felt more like a declaration of war than a peacekeeping mission. It cemented the perception of ECOWAS as a hostile force, a tool willing to shed African blood to maintain a status quo that benefited outsiders. This aggressive stance also shined a spotlight on a glaring hypocrisy. Where was this iron fist when other regional leaders twisted their constitutions to stay in power? Where were the crippling sanctions for sham elections or crackdowns on dissent? The selective outrage was deafening. It seemed to confirm the long-held suspicion that ECOWAS wasn't a community of equals, but a club for protecting incumbent presidents, no matter how they ruled, while punishing those who overthrew them, no matter how much popular support they had. The sanctions and the threat of war backfired completely. Instead of isolating the juntas, it unified their people behind them. It unleashed a wave of anti-ECOWAS and anti-French sentiment. And most importantly, it pushed the three military-led nations, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, into each other's arms. They now had a shared enemy and a shared destiny. The blockade, meant to break them, had instead forged them into a new, defiant alliance. Every story has a point of no return. For Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, that moment came in September 2023. As ECOWAS threatened invasion, the three nations hit back not with surrender, but with a stunning act of unity. They signed the Lit-Turco-Gourma Charter, creating the Alliance of Sahel States, or AES. This was way more than a press release. It was a mutual defense pact, a direct answer to ECOWAS threats. The core of the charter was crystal clear. An attack on one member would be considered an attack on all, requiring the others to provide aid, including military force. In one move, they had created a new security bloc for the Sahel. They were telling ECOWAS and the world, if you come for one of us, you'll have to fight all three. The creation of the AES was a geopolitical earthquake. It created a rival power bloc right in the heart of West Africa, a confederation united by a security crisis and a shared rejection of the old guard. The juntas had called ECOWAS bluff. An invasion now meant a massive regional war, a price no one was willing to pay. With their security now guaranteed by their own pact, the final break was inevitable. On January 28, 2024, in a coordinated broadcast, the three nations announced their immediate withdrawal from ECOWAS. The statement was fiery, accusing the bloc of straying from the ideals of its founders and falling under the influence of foreign powers. It slammed the inhumane sanctions as a betrayal. Under ECOWAS rules, a country must give 1 year notice, so the exit was formalized on January 29, 2025. ECOWAS later offered a 6-month transition period for negotiations, but the AES countries rejected it, calling it a delay tactic and sticking to their timeline. For them, the decision was final. This was their ultimate act of defiance. They weren't just leaving an economic union. They were symbolically breaking the chains of a post-colonial system they felt had failed them. The move sent shockwaves through ECOWAS headquarters in Abuja. The bloc was losing a huge chunk of its territory, over 2.7 million square kilometers, and a combined population of over 71 million people. Contrary to some fears of a logistical nightmare, most of ECOWAS's key institutions are located in Nigeria and Ghana, not the departing states, though the bloc did begin a process of relocating some programs. The move was still a devastating blow to the bloc's prestige and its very reason for being. The three nations had crossed the threshold. As a symbol of their new path, they began issuing their own AES-branded biometric passports to citizens. The path ahead would be tough, but it would be their own. They were no longer just characters in a story written by others. They were now the authors of their own. Walking out of ECOWAS was a massive act of rebellion. But what comes next? For the alliance of Sahel states, the answer was clear: build new bridges, and build them in a different direction. This next chapter is all about a radical pivot away from the West and toward new, and some would say controversial, partners. The first big move was kicking out the last of the Western military forces. For years, French and American troops were the main international players fighting terrorism in the Sahel. But to the new juntas and their supporters, these forces were a symbol of a failed strategy and an insult to their sovereignty. One by one, the AES countries told them to pack their bags. French ambassadors were expelled. Military bases were shut down. The French flag came down for good, ending a long, complicated chapter of military intervention. Into this vacuum stepped Russia. The pivot to Moscow was a deliberate, highly public realignment. Delegations from the AES countries started making regular trips to Russia. This was about more than just handshakes. It was about locking in a new security partner. The Wagner Group's operations were rebranded and brought under the direct control of the Russian Ministry of Defense in a new entity known as the Africa Corps. This marked the end of plausible deniability. This was now an official extension of the Russian state. Russian military trainers and equipment began flowing into the Sahel, with promises to deliver the security the West had failed to provide. Russia, in return, gained huge influence, access to strategic resources like Niger's uranium, and a major geopolitical win. But the shift isn't just military. The AES leaders know real sovereignty requires economic independence. A major target is the CFA franc. For decades, this West African currency has been tied to the euro and guaranteed by France, a system many critics call neo-colonial. The AES leaders have openly discussed dropping the CFA and creating their own common currency. To back this up, they announced the creation of a confederal bank for investment and development in May 2025, a first step toward building a self-sufficient economic zone. Beyond Russia, the AES is also building ties with other non-Western powers. China is a natural partner for infrastructure, while Turkey and Iran have also been courted. The strategy is to diversify, to make sure they never again become dependent on a single power bloc. This is a high-stakes gamble. The path the EEAs has chosen is full of risks. The Russian security model comes with a troubling human rights record, and breaking away from established economic systems could lead to massive disruption. But for the leaders and many people in the Sahel, these are risks worth taking for what they see as true independence. They aren't waiting for a seat at a table they believe was rigged. They're building their own table, inviting new guests, and setting their own rules. We've just witnessed a geopolitical earthquake. The departure of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger from ECOWAS isn't a small detail in African history. It's a chapter heading. It's the explosive result of decades of frustration with a post-colonial order that, from their perspective, promised partnership but delivered paternalism. The dream of ECOWAS, a vision of unity and shared prosperity, has been shattered. For the alliance of Sahel states, the institution became a symbol of everything they were fighting against: foreign influence, ineffective leadership, and a total disconnect from the urgent needs of their people. Their journey has created a new reality on the ground. West Africa, once defined by a single bloc, is now split between two competing visions. This domino effect is now a real possibility. The actions of the AEAs have exposed a deep crisis of legitimacy and purpose within ECOWAS. The bloc's failure to prevent the split and its heavy-handed response has alienated not just the three departed nations, but many other West Africans who see it as an out-of-touch president's club. Unless ECOWAS can prove it serves the interests of its people, not outside powers, the question isn't if another nation will follow the AES, but when. The future for the Sahel is deeply uncertain. The road for the alliance is steep, filled with challenges from fighting a relentless insurgency to building a working economy. Their new partnerships, especially with Russia, are a gamble with an unknown payoff. But for the first time in a long time, it's a future they are building for themselves, on their own terms. While Western influence certainly hasn't ended in the region, the era of a single Western-backed consensus is clearly over. A new, more chaotic, and much more multipolar era has begun. This is a pivotal moment, and the story is far from over. What do you think the future holds for West Africa? Is this a necessary step toward real independence, or a dangerous fragmentation that will lead to more instability? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay on top of the real geopolitical shifts happening across the world, make sure to like and subscribe. This is a pivotal moment, and the story is far from over. What do you think the future holds for West Africa? Is this a necessary step toward real independence, or a dangerous fragmentation that will lead to more instability? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to stay on top of the real geopolitical shifts happening across the world, make sure to like and subscribe.